Original/infinite flow/suspense/criminal investigation/social faction/escape/pure/group images/pure love/rule-based rumors/outside and inside worlds. Dear patient, hello. After multiple confirmations from our hospital, you have been diagnosed with white knight syndrome. Please do not worry about the harm of this disease. According to our research findings, this disease belongs to a benign disease, mainly manifested as hallucinations, which we refer to as white dreams. However, please rest assured that although there is no treatment plan for this disease in China, as long as you come to our hospital for emergency treatment on time, there will never be any serious accidents. So, please fill in your personal information, wishes, and contact information in the following survey questionnaire. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Finally, if daydreaming has frequently affected your life, please seek medical attention promptly. Keywords of the novel. No pop-up window for white knight syndrome. Download the complete set of White Knight Syndrome TXT, and read the latest chapters of White Knight Syndrome. Chapter 1. 001 Jingzhe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1001. Jingzhe, ding-ling, with the crisp sound of the hanging silver bell colliding with the door frame, the reception of the office in the morning officially came to an end as we watched the last guest leave with a dull step. Li Ming stood by the door for a moment, lost his mind, and after emitting a somewhat impatient tone, he reached out his hand to wipe away most of the dust on the old wooden door glass. His sharp eyes looked out through the glass and looked out towards the outside world. The clear sky stretches for thousands of miles. Rare good weather. Squinting my eyes and looking up, there are only some clouds floating in the sky, and a clear blue color is clearly visible. At this moment, a black car was driving on the road outside the door, and the dazzling sunlight was reflected on half of Li Ming's body through the car window. He quickly retreated into the shadow as if he had been electrocuted. He hates sunny days. No, to be more precise, he hates sunshine. He hates all warm and dazzling things. After glancing at the long-handled black umbrella leaning against the wall, Li Ming returned to the slightly old desk and scanned the scattered white paper before finally landing on the desk calendar at the corner. To some extent, this can be considered his only memory of his hometown in a foreign land. Although there are also Chinese characters in Japanese writing, they are far from their native language. Coupled with some special personal reasons, I have been here for 3 years but have not yet learned all 50 sounds. The wandering thoughts were retracted as they returned to the calendar with their gaze. Today is January 18, 2023, and I think the New Year's Eve in my hometown is coming soon. I don't know if my hometown is bustling with activity or if they have been busy for such a big day as the Spring Festival for a long time. But then again, even if you're there, what can you do? The liveliness ultimately belongs to others. Taking a deep breath to calm her mood, Li Ming refocused her gaze on the desk. After casually arranging the white paper covered in black handwriting and putting it aside, Li Ming took out a stack of brand new Japanese yen bills from the drawer on the side of his desk and stuffed them all into the prepared envelope before sitting back in place. He lit a cigarette, but Li Ming was not in a hurry to get close to his mouth. Instead, he held it between his index and middle fingers and stared blankly at the white smoke rising from the burning tobacco. For a long time, Li Ming leaned his head lightly against the back of the chair and closed his already sore eyes. The air gradually becomes moist, and when your hands are exposed to the air, there will not be many small water droplets condensing on them. Here. Li Ming seemed to feel the change in his surroundings and opened his eyes to look around, his face slightly changing. Fog. Thick fog. The first thing that caught the eye was a hazy area, and with the help of the faint light that had not yet fully risen, it was barely recognizable that he was now in a dilapidated wooden house. Just Li Ming wanted to stand up and observe his surroundings carefully, but found that his hands were already tied to the chair at an unknown time. Twisting his wrist, it will not only allows for a clear sense of pain, but also allows him to feel that the rope that binds his hands, although thick, is torn and tattered. So as long as you continue to pull hard, you can. Li Ming, who had broken free from the constraints of the rope, instinctively rubbed his sore eyes and took the first step tentatively. Stepping on the wooden planks of the cabin, the sound of sawdust falling off contrasts with the harsh creaking sound of old disrepair, giving people the illusion that as long as they continue to step, they will create a hole and then fall. Li Ming lowered her eyes and looked at her attire, letting out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there hasn't been a situation like before. It seems like this is just. As Li Ming walked cautiously, the thick fog around him dissipated a lot, and he could vaguely see the full picture of his surroundings. This is an ancient wooden house, and due to its age, there is almost no valuable thing found inside. Except for the chair just placed in the middle of the wooden house, the rest is piled up like a mountain of waste. The wooden house was so dilapidated that it didn't even have a wooden door, with only a gap half a person high. Looking outside, one could vaguely see the weeds everywhere. Moreover, from the window of the wooden house, which was only a smaller gap, some green vine plants that came in showed that the wooden house was basically covered by these plants. The rustling sound of the cold wind blowing and the collision of branches and leaves hides a strange smell. An indescribable taste. It's like a strange smell of decay, foul odor, mold, and soil mixed together. Li Ming stopped his steps and frowned, enduring the smell that made it difficult for him to breathe. The thick fog that permeated the wooden house gradually dissipated at this moment as the warm sun rose, while Li Ming observed around more cautiously and cautiously. Goo! The sudden sound seemed even more piercing in the current environment, and Li Ming instinctively turned his head to look. At this moment, a toad appeared in the corner to his right, which was filled with garbage. It lay there, with its stomach heaving and a pair of emotionless eyes staring at Li Ming across from him. The two faced off for a long time, but in the end, the toad hopped away as if nothing had happened. Li Ming couldn't help but feel a bit amused. In such an unfamiliar environment, any living creature that appeared here could cause such a great reaction on her own. He is really crazy. Or rather, is it too sensitive? Just as Li Ming was about to leave here, he noticed a sudden appearance of a color that was completely incompatible with the environment in the corner garbage dump. Why didn't you see it just now? Perhaps because the toad's jumping exposed this color to the air. Li Ming pursed her lips and continued to walk cautiously towards the blue color. At this moment, the warm sun finally rose completely from the east, shining through the gap on the garbage heap in the corner. This was supposed to be a great opportunity to observe the anomaly in front of him, but Li Ming stopped in front of the sunny area. He hates sunlight. But paradoxically, his thirst for knowledge drove him to take that step. Li Ming looked around and rummaged for a while, finally finding a broken long stick in the garbage dump on the other side that was not exposed to sunlight. With the help of such external force, Li Ming finally reached the blue owner in front of him. After picking it up, Li Ming found that it was a work card, and the blue thing was a hanging rope on this work card. Wiping away the dust and small pieces of garbage with his hands, Zhenchai Wayutai was prominently written on this small piece of paper, while the company below the name, in Li Ming's memory, was a printing company not far from the office. This is. As Li Ming was lost in thought, outside the wooden house, or rather, the entire space, there was a rapid knocking on the door, as if someone had installed speakers in the four corners of the ceiling, echoing in their ears. Li Ming woke up like a nightmare, and when he regained his senses, he was still sitting on the chair in the office, with the cigarette between his fingers still slowly floating with the ash. Outside the door, the knocking continued. New book for newcomers. Hope everyone likes it. Additionally, due to special settings, any sentence enclosed with the symbol in the text is the protagonist's thought and not the words spoken. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. 002 Disappearance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2002. Disappearance. Driving the burning cigarette butt into the ashtray at hand, Li Ming hastily tidied up the decorations on the desk and patted his face, then stood up and went to the door to prepare to open it. As soon as the door was opened, a figure quickly rushed into the office, displaying a strange pose. Li Ming seemed to have become accustomed to it long ago. He glanced outside the door and tried to keep himself away from the sunlight as much as possible. After realizing that there were no other guests, he closed the door directly. The room once again fell into darkness. "Are you here?" Li Ming pursed her lips and whispered, "The commission fee has already been placed on the table. You can go and get it yourself." As she spoke, Li Ming's voice was light, slow, as if pondering something in her heart. "So, tell me about the valuable things you have investigated." "Hey. Li Ming, you're still the same. I've traveled thousands of miles to come to your place, and you didn't even give me a sip of water. You still want me to tell you these things?" The newcomer looks about the same age as Li Ming, but when speaking, it always makes people feel a bit childish. Seeing Li Ming spreading his hand towards him, the young man pouted and then, as if treating this place as his own home, turned on the light without hesitation. Then, he found coffee beans and a coffee machine in the coffee cabinet that Li Ming regarded as a decoration by the door. "What's going on? You're useless with this coffee machine. It's not worth my long trip to the market to buy it as a birthday gift for you. I didn't expect you to disappoint my kindness so much." When he saw that Li Ming wanted to say something more, the young man immediately reached out his hand and placed his palm on Li Ming, preventing him from following his actions. "Forget it, you've already said so much. I don't want you to trigger that NG just because I'm here with you. You should talk to me in the way you often talk to your client. Then I'll write it out and you don't have to read it carefully." Li Ming shook his head helplessly and returned to the position he had just sat in. He took out a piece of white paper from the drawer and casually wrote a few words on it with a pencil, then showed it to the young man. The young man, as if deliberately trying to anger Li Ming, drank coffee and squinted his eyes, looking contented. "What kind of words are you writing? It's all in a mess. I see if you've been in Japan for a long time and can't even recognize your mother tongue." The last scream was a scream, as Li Ming had already crumpled the white paper into a ball and threw it towards the young man. After finally getting enough to eat and drink, and playing and frolicking, the young man tidied up his clothes, leaned against the table, picked up the envelope that Li Ming had already prepared, and casually glanced inside before taking it into his bag. "All right, let's not make a fuss. Now let me talk about the news I've been gathering outside for the past week." The young man paused for a moment, as if waiting for something from Li Ming. Li Ming immediately reacted to the situation and took out a slightly thick notebook with a large number of sticky notes and labels from the last drawer on the side of the desk. Turning to the page marked January 11th, I grabbed the pencil from the pen holder on one side of the desk and calmly waited for the young man's next words. "First of all, for this missing person case, I have found some clues, but unfortunately, the police discovered it early and it can be closed now." The young man spread out his hand with a helpless expression. "However, Li Ming, don't lose heart either. In Japan, there are many people who entrust investigations from multiple sources, and few people only hope for one person. However, this is only superficial." The young man paused for a moment, took out a white paper from his pocket, and handed it to Li Ming. "Is this?" Li Ming didn't make a sound. After seeing the words on the white paper, he took a deep breath. "Very familiar, the medical record notification form for patients with white knight syndrome." The young man snorted lightly. "This is what I spent a lot of effort to find at the homes of missing persons. Can you flip through your notebook and count how many cases of disappearance have the protagonist of white knight syndrome patients? So, as long as someone suffers from white knight syndrome, their ultimate fate is either death or disappearance." Li Ming wrote his thoughts on white paper and showed them to the young man. Although he had previously spoken indistinct jokes, the young man still read them carefully. "It's not like that, I think. Don't you think patients like us are still living well?" The young man placed his hand on his chin in contemplation. "That's because we haven't done anything that the hospital can pay attention to yet," right? I haven't noticed it yet. I haven't noticed it yet. I haven't noticed it yet. The young man repeated these words in an exaggerated tone. They have already gone to the patients' homes to find any clues related to the hospital, but haven't they noticed yet? So, how big an event would they have to pay attention to? It's unlikely that they killed their hospital staff. The young man fantasized and guessed while sighing. He glanced at Li Ming, who was still writing something, leaned his head over, and reached out to the white paper in front of him. What are you writing? It's like this, I found a very interesting fact. Do you remember the progress ranking released by the hospital before? It's basically updated every day, I mean, first place. So the question is, where did those patients who originally held the first place go? But according to the hospital's instructions, those patients who have fulfilled their wishes are basically cured and no longer eligible to stay on the ranking list, the young man retorted. Li Ming sneered in disdain and continued to write, Jiang Wencan, I see you. Your thoughts have been deceived by the hospital again. Do you still remember what was said on the notice we received? Is the phrase, although there is currently no treatment plan for this disease in China, true? The young man named Jiang Wencan came to his senses, which means that this day and night syndrome is an incurable disease. Hey! That's really strange. Where have they gone? Jiang Wencan muttered to himself, looking puzzled. Li Ming snorted lightly and took out another piece of white paper from the drawer, handing it to Jiang Wencan. This is the name of the protagonist of all the disappearance cases I have received in the 3 years since I received the case. Can you help me investigate their final outcome, whether they died or really evaporated from the human world? Oh, you old man can do it. I've been friends with you for so long and I didn't expect you to have sorted out these materials long ago. Jiang Wencan took the paper, but it's obviously not enough to spend a week investigating these things, at least a month. Just as their communication reached a crucial point, another knocking came from outside the door. It's an unexpected visitor. May I ask if Mr. Li Ming is here? We are from the Chiba County Police Station, and I would like to discuss some questions about Mr. Jingzhe Wutai with you. Please make sure to open the door, otherwise we will take extraordinary measures. Thank you for your cooperation. Character communication is my weakness, Fu Er. I hope everyone can point out some issues in this chapter, and I will describe them better in future updates. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. 003 Fingerprints. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 4. 004 White Dream. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4004. White Dreams, Officer. What you need to know is that as self-proclaimed creatures at the top of nature's food chain, their minds are often the most complex. Jiang Wencan had a confident smile on his face, as if he had the chance to win the conversation that followed. When he contacted his profession again, everything seemed to have become reasonable. Just as the two were about to enter the second round of debate and Li Ming was preparing to watch a good show, Officer Saito raised his hand and prevented the person next to him from making any further moves. Alright, Chizaki, that's all for now. As I said, we're just here for a visit. Don't scare the two gentlemen. Saito reached out and took the sealed bag from the man next to him, waving it in front of the two, his movements becoming slightly lazy. Mr. Li Ming and Mr. Jiang Wencan, please forgive my subordinate's excessive language. Regarding the fingerprint issue, we will investigate further. In fact, there are not only you but also many fingerprints found on the work permit. Our main purpose for this visit is to collect evidence for better judgment in the future. After speaking, Officer Saito made a standard 90-degree bow. For some reason, Li Ming always wanted to laugh at this gesture, which truly embodies the spirit of Japanese bowmakers. Jiang Wencan waved his hand indifferently, as if driving away a group of buzzing flies. Then he turned his back and walked straight inside. So, let's not disturb the two gentlemen for now. Saito took a step back, took out a small notebook from his pocket, and drew a stroke on it before leaving with Chizaki. Li Ming gently closed the door, but did not immediately return to Jiang Wenkan's side. He was pondering why his fingerprints could be found on an item carried by a person who had never planned to face before. Is it the one from this morning? There were some noisy sounds coming from outside, and Li Ming's thoughts were drawn away. Through the glass, he saw what Chai Chi had said to Officer Saito, who was about to argue with Jiang Wenkan before, and quickly walked towards the direction of the public restroom. Li Ming stared blankly at the direction where Chai Chi was leaving. At this moment, Chai Chi seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned to look at the office. Vaguely, Li Ming seemed to see the slightly raised curve at the corner of Chai Chi's mouth, appearing so ill-intentioned in that environment. What's wrong, what are you looking at? Jiang Wenkan's voice came over, and he jumped off the desk. Curiously, he crowded over to Li Ming's side and cast his gaze outside with him. After discovering that there was nothing worth noting, the young man withdrew his gaze and glanced at Li Ming. Hey, I said Li Ming. I've told you several times that your dislike of sunlight is entirely due to psychological effects. Don't you think you're standing well within the range of sunlight now? Upon being reminded by Jiang Wenkan, Li Ming realized that most of her body was already exposed to the sunlight. Although it is currently in the midst of winter and she is still dressed quite well, Li Ming still feels as if she has been scalded, quickly retreating at an astonishing speed. By the way, what does the last sentence you said to Chai Chi mean? Li Ming wrote while tidying up her clothes. What you need to know is that there are many ways for you to collect intelligence when you're young. Jiang Wenkan took off the flat mirror on his face, wiped it, and put it back in his pocket. I heard a lot of interesting news before I came to you. Interesting news. Li Ming seemed uninterested, but out of courtesy, he tentatively wrote. That wife, who is really passionate about her affairs, had a big argument with her husband a few days ago because she was found out to have an affair. All the neighbors around here know about it, and it's normal for you to keep it a secret. Jiang Wenkan let out a click and spread out his hand. So, it is reasonable for Mr. Jingzhe to entrust a private detective from the agency to investigate his wife's affair. After all, most private detectives in Japan, except for special cases where they can be entrusted, usually wander around to find cats, dogs, and catch rapists at the grassroots level. Indeed. Li Ming really wants to agree, because in the early days when he came here and chose to become a private detective, he was mostly commissioned to search for missing cats and dogs. Looking back now, it was really a very interesting time. Besides, how could you be related to that real guy? Jiang Wenkan was a bit curious. If it weren't for my strong adaptability, you mute person wouldn't have known what the situation would be like to face those police officers. Faced with such a bizarre situation, Li Ming could only recount a series of events that had happened before he came in. So, it's possible that the white dream you experienced is connected to the real world, the young man pondered, but we can't draw a conclusion yet because we don't know much about the condition of white knight syndrome. Indeed, that's true. Li Ming wrote in agreement. At present, we still prioritize self-protection, just like the topic we discussed before. No one knows what the fate of patients is, and those who disappear actually trigger what causes death or disappearance. Of course, this is just speculation. Li Ming let out a deep sigh. Since receiving the case notification, everything in his life has become completely different from before. By the way, Li Ming, according to your description, haven't you been to the hospital for treatment in a long time? Jiang Wenkan took out a medical record card from his left pocket, which was filled with red handwriting. Go and take a look, the current situation is starting to affect your life, isn't it? Li Ming instinctively glanced at the door, then lowered his head and pursed his mouth again. The bright sunlight made him feel a sense of retreat. I know you have psychological shadows about sunshine, but compared to psychological shadows, life is the most important thing. I don't want my friends to die tragically while exploring with me. Jiang Wenkan's voice came from the door, and Li Ming followed the sound. The young man in front of him had already placed his hand on the doorknob and was ready to leave. There's one more thing, Li Ming. After completing the tasks here, let's go back to my home country and have a look. I went home before and heard that my uncle's health is not very good. Got it, Li Ming responded softly. He stood by the door. Of course, in a place where the sunlight could not reach. Watching the young man leave with a somewhat sad expression. Outside the door, the noisy sound continued. At the moment the door was closed, a familiar but unfamiliar voice came over. Ah, I'm sorry, Captain Saito. I'm feeling a bit unwell in my stomach and it's been too late. I'm very sorry. Ah. Ahem, hello. I'm Shibataki Mitsuro from the Chiba Prefectural Police Station. I came here mainly to ask about Mr. Masashi. Do you know? 2 chapters today. Maybe in the future, there will be 2 chapters a day. I wonder when Mengxin can sign the contract for her first book writing. Besides, the cover is already done and should be replaced soon. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. 005 Wishes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5005. Wishes. After Jiang Wenkan, the only one who could bring human touch and laughter, left, the entire office once again fell into shadow and damp silence. Li Ming returned to his seat and silently lowered his head, his somewhat messy bangs falling naturally. Ignite the last cigarette, inhale the gas from tobacco burning, and then exhale again, but involuntarily fall into a corner of the office. For a long time, just as the cigarette was about to burn out, Li Ming finally regained consciousness and looked at the scattered cigarette butts in the ashtray, grinning bitterly. I don't know if there have been more and more incidents of being entrusted, but recently he has always been absent-minded during what he sees as relaxed smoking time, so most of the things in the ashtray are left by him after letting it burn naturally. What a waste. Li Ming shook his head and took out the electronic watch he was carrying with him, taking a glance at time. Ah, it's almost 12 o'clock. He couldn't help but sigh as time passed by, and then looked at the medical record card that had been stored in the left drawer. Let's go have lunch first, and then go to the hospital to take a look. With such a decision, Li Ming placed the medical record card in the coat pocket on the door hanger, draped it over his body, and then turned his gaze to the long-handled black umbrella leaning against the door. Opening the black umbrella, although the shading effect of the black cloth in such strong sunlight is not very good, it also weakens most of the warmth and glare. Although Li Ming's office is located within the Tokyo metropolitan area, it is not so luxurious. For example, it is located in the suburbs of the Second Ring Road in the capital city of China. As he was about to leave, the noisy voices kept ringing in Li Ming's ears. Hearing the sound of door closing near the direction of the office, the 2 guys from the police station instinctively looked towards him. The police officer who claimed to be Saito only nodded at him, and what really made Li Ming look puzzled was Chai-Chi's expression, although he also saw himself and bowed to him along with Saito, was filled with a look of doubt and unfamiliarity on his face. Does this guy no longer know me after such a short time? What does the expression that guy made before mean? Li closed his mouth and stood in the same place to meditate, but soon his thoughts were caught by the strong hunger from his abdomen. He smiled and stepped up to the nearest ramen noodles restaurant. In various ways, Li Ming can be considered a regular here. After gesturing and negotiating with the waiter who was already very clear about the situation, he chose a seat in the farthest corner. Because it is a corner, everything in the ramen noodles shop is almost at a glance. Looking up at the old clock on the wall, Li Ming poured himself a glass of white water and waited for the ramen noodles he ordered to be brought up. He looked at the faces of every customer in the store with scrutinizing eyes. Perhaps it was because the deadline was approaching in the afternoon, and the customers in this store were scattered, with most of them completely unaware of him in the corner. But when observing the whole picture, it was inevitable that Li Ming saw a couple near the corner of the cashier, who were kissing closely together. It seemed that they were in a passionate relationship, filled with a strong sweet atmosphere, which seemed out of place with the atmosphere in this store. Li Ming pursed her lips, feeling a tinge of sourness in her heart as she found it interesting. This feeling is very strange. I have become accustomed to living alone, but seeing someone else's passionate love makes me feel like they are deliberately mocking me. I'm really crazy. Li Ming cursed inwardly and reached out his hand to suddenly pour the cooled white water into his stomach, hoping to use the cold liquid to dilute his inner dryness. A large glass of white water poured into my stomach, and I finally felt a lot of inner comfort. Just as Li Ming was about to place the glass in his hand on the table, a figure suddenly appeared in his sight. It wasn't because he was very familiar with this figure that what really caught his attention was actually the umbrella that this figure was holding in his hand. As an abandoned apostle, Li Ming's attention is always drawn to these inexplicable points, and when he sees a sunny day holding an umbrella, he will think that the person is of the same kind as himself. Miss Kurosawa, take your time. The shop assistant with ramen noodles not far away smiled to say goodbye to the woman with the umbrella, then turned his head and walked towards Li Ming. Kurosawa. Li Ming silently wrote down the name, took the ramen noodles brought by the clerk, and picked up chopsticks to eat in the polite farewell sound of the other party. Perhaps it's because they feel a bit bored, or maybe people are just such creatures. The more they don't want to see or even hate them, the more their attention will be directed towards that place while waiting in the long river. Li Ming once again turned his eyes to the two men and women who were in love. At this time, they had stopped kissing like no one else, but began to taste ramen noodles face to face. By the way, Suzuki Jun, haven't I been going to the hospital recently because I'm feeling unwell? Guess what the end result was? While eating ramen noodles in silence, Li Ming heard the voices of the men and women who had just spoken. With curiosity and gossip, he did not hide these voices. That doctor's expression is really scary, Suzuki Jun. He said what I'm suffering from. Let me take a look. It's the sound of folded white paper unfolding. Ah, it's this. I'm suffering from white knight syndrome. The doctor said that there are almost no successful cases of treatment for this disease in China. Suzuki, do you think I will die? White knight syndrome. That's the name again. Li closed his eyes for a moment, and did not stop dealing with ramen noodles. Since the girl said these 5 words, his interest was led to the peak. While meditating, he also sighed that it was indeed the reaction of new patients. According to the mentality of those old fogies who had been ill for a long time, it was really the attitude of the Western dragon towards gold coins, which was very strict. But this newcomer, surprisingly, shamelessly exposed his situation in public. Newcomers still need to hone their skills. This statement is an eternal truth in various situations. Suzuki Jun, I was really about to cry, you know. And that doctor wasn't as gentle and comforting as Suzuki Jun at all. He waited until I was about to cry before handing me some strange forms to fill out. The normal process. Li Ming nodded slightly. The strangest thing about these forms is the wish, which has to be filled in with something that is simply impossible to achieve. I really don't understand why it's impossible to achieve. After filling it in, I filled in, world destruction. Puff. I drove all day to go home today and started writing at night, so I'm very sorry for today's chapter. Also, can you give me some feedback after reading the book? I would like to know the quality and shortcomings of my work, and I will study hard and make corrections. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. 006ing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6006.ng. The doctor handed me a form printed on white paper and asked me to truthfully fill out all the information on it. From a distance, the girl gestured to the boy named Suzuki with an excited and somewhat incoherent expression. This is also normal. When Li Ming was told that she had white knight syndrome, although she was not as exaggerated as this girl, her behavior was actually similar to hers. Suzuki, do you know what's on that form? It's like a survey questionnaire, and the strangest thing is the wish in the last line. According to the doctor, it must still be an unfulfilled wish. That's true. I don't know when Li Ming stopped dealing with ramen noodles, but bowed his head and leaned his face against the chopsticks unconsciously, and listened to the conversation with his head slightly sideways. No, to be precise, it's a solo performance for girls. Thanks to the fact that there are few people in ramen noodles restaurant, no one cares as much about the news about White Knight syndrome as Li Ming does, and no one found Li Ming's little actions. Really, I have to fill in a wish that I can't even fulfill. Isn't that holding me for fun, Suzuki-jun? Are you right? Suzuki responded softly, then looked at the girl in front of her with an interested expression. So what did you fill in? Although Suzuki's voice was as low as whispering, Li Ming, who carefully listened to their conversation, certainly did not overlook this detail. Quickly, he felt a familiar and unfamiliar allusion in the boy's voice, as if he had heard it somewhere before, but searching for memories in his mind did not find a matching tone. Wait a minute, why does this guy's voice seem to have been heard somewhere before? Li Ming was slightly stunned, and his eyes instinctively glanced towards the two of them. The boy's appearance fell into his eyes, and he was very certain that he had never seen this person before. So, where have you heard this sound before? Or, in other words, some of the tones in this voice can make oneself feel familiar. But if that's the case, it must indicate that Suzuki is pretending to be himself. Thinking of this, Li Ming couldn't help but smile and shake his head. He didn't expect that male high school students nowadays have such strong vigilance. It's interesting not to expose their original voice in such a public environment. With this thought in mind, the conversation between the men and women over there was still constantly being transmitted to Li Ming's ears. Me. I was being held for fun, of course I was very angry, stupid Suzuki. Then I filled it with the word world destruction. Puff. Li Ming choked and nearly vomited the noodles he had just eaten into the bowl. After receiving the white water from the waiter of the ramen noodles shop and thanking him, he continued to pretend not to hear anything and played with his electronic watch. The world is destroyed. This revenge is too strong, isn't it? Li Ming pursed her lips and a mocking smile flowed from the corner of her mouth. After filling out everything, the doctor expressionlessly entered my information into the computer. The girl's voice had a hint of being angry with others, and then he didn't tell me anything and just let me out. Is that so? So, after finishing these things, didn't those doctors tell you anything? Suzuki's voice drifted over with a swaying sound. I mean, if you found an incurable condition during your examination, didn't the doctor tell you what to pay attention to in your daily life? In various ways, this is also a question that Li Ming really wants to ask. He couldn't help but sit up upright, pick up the glass of white water on the table, and continue to drink slowly. In fact, it was already a drunken man's intention not to drink anymore. What should I pay attention to? The girl tapped her fingers naturally on the table. Yes. Suzuki, I remember. I remember being called over by another man in a white coat after leaving the doctor's office. It's just that the man doesn't look like a doctor. He's wearing protective clothing that looks like he did during the previous outbreak of the epidemic, and it feels like he's conducting some kind of experiment. That's right, that's right. Li Ming nodded thoughtfully, her past memories gradually making a comeback as the girl spoke. This is exactly what he needs to do now. He thought that daytime and nighttime syndrome was just an incurable common benign disease, but after experiencing these days of daydreaming, he increasingly felt that there was some hidden secret behind this disease. For example, what just happened this morning? Why did Li Ming touch his work card in his dream and his fingerprints were detected on the actual work card? Didn't the hospital say before that the illness only causes hallucinations? Is what he experienced this morning really just an illusion? So, using his identity as a private detective, Li Ming began to explore, and this was the beginning. The staff member wearing protective clothing informed me about some things about prohibited items that seem to be something that cannot be done during illness. The girl's voice sounded somewhat contemptuous, and she seemed to not believe what the hospital was saying. Seeing them talking like that, I always feel like they are doing some kind of prank that is common on the internet. Are you right, Suzuki-jun? I wouldn't believe such a loopy prank. Well, it's clearly a prank. Suzuki turned her back to Li Ming, unable to see the expression on his face clearly. However, from his voice, Li Ming could always feel a slight fluctuation, as if she was suppressing an impending emotion and trying to calm it down. I'm curious about something. Can you tell me what the prohibited items you were told about? You know, I also write novels on a regular basis, so this is a great inspiration setting. Hey! Isn't Suzuki-jun writing love novels? How could he be interested in such things? Alright, since it's Suzuki-jun's request, I'll tell you, it's coriander. Coriander. Li Ming was slightly stunned, and then he had no intention of listening to what the couple said. Prohibited items, also known as NG, are things that are not allowed to be done during illness, as the girl said. However, there seems to be one thing that the hospital did not explain to her clearly. As long as NG is triggered, the patient will die immediately. No, Li Ming remembered that even the death rule was not informed by the hospital. It happened that when he received the notice that day, someone triggered NG and that person died suddenly in front of him. After witnessing such a scene, the hospital made an exception to explain this rule in order to calm the emotions of other patients. However, if the prohibited item is coriander, that is to say, as long as you do not eat coriander during the illness, you can avoid triggering the immediate death rule. With this in mind, a male scream suddenly came from a distance. At the same time, a figure quickly walked out of the main door of the ramen noodles shop. Today the typing speed is slow, please forgive me. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. 007 Death. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7007. Death. Alright, since it's Suzuki-jun's problem, let me tell you. Don't be so anxious. The girl said shyly, anticipating a flirtation with her boyfriend. That person said my prohibited item was coriander. Can't you eat coriander during illness? The boy sitting opposite her changed his expression slightly and continued to ask in a curious tone. The girl spread out her hands and a nonchalant attitude surged onto her cheeks. I've talked about Suzuki-jun, this must be a prank. I didn't ask for details, so I just left. Then you. Suzuki's voice suddenly raised, causing customers in the ramen noodles shop to squint. He knew he was not very polite, so he suppressed the desire to say the next thing loudly, coughed a few times, and continued in a trembling voice as light as possible, why didn't you ask clearly? Suzuki-jun, you're so strange. Didn't you just say, that must be a prank, just like me? Since it was a prank, why do I need to know the details? Because it's related. Suzuki hesitated to speak, almost gritting his teeth to restrain his desire to take action. Soon, he sighed, forget it, it's okay. The boy named Suzuki took out a tissue from his pocket and wiped away the non-existent sweat on his face. Rapid heartbeat and respiratory disorders. If I continue to talk to this foolish woman, I'm afraid I'll also be driven crazy. I've never seen such a foolish woman before. Suzuki thought of it like this. He glanced at some spices and ingredients on the counter and silently carried his ramen noodles bowl there. After symbolically adding some seasoning such as salt, vinegar, and chili, Suzuki turned her gaze to the bowl of coriander, with a twisted and strange expression on her face. At the entrance of coriander, a strong aroma instantly rushed into the nose, almost choking Suzuki. He glanced at all the customers present, except for the person in the corner who was somewhat surprised, everyone else was doing their own thing. The corner of his mouth drew a strange curve, hid the leaf of coriander under his tongue, and then put ramen noodles in his hand and returned to its position. "Sorry, I was a bit too excited just now. You know, I'm a novelist and when faced with inspiration, I have a different face. I'm very sorry." Suzuki smiled at the girl apologetically. He pushed ramen noodles aside and looked at the girl's angry expression in front of him, showing a stiff smile. "After we finish our noodles, let's go to your favorite place to play. Don't be angry." Suzuki reached out his bracelet and hugged the girl, touching her cheek with his hand. "To show my apologies, I'll satisfy you with everything you want after today, okay?" "Really?" The girl didn't realize the danger was coming yet. She blinked her eyes naively, her eyes filled with hopeful starlight. "Of course it's true, little fool." Suzuki hugged the girl tightly, leaned her mouth up, and lightly kissed the girl's lips in front of her. Stirring, intoxicated, forgetting oneself. How can a girl possibly defeat a boy who is even several times stronger than her? Suzuki was crazy, infatuated, with a twisted face, and handed the leafy coriander into the girl's mouth. After confirming that she couldn't spit it out temporarily, she finally relaxed her mouth and hands. "I'm really sorry, I used too much force." Kissing a girl for the first time was exciting. Suzuki, the gentleman, smiled and said in a voice that was very cold and unfamiliar to the girl. Then he stood up, put his clothes in order, and went into the bathroom of the ramen noodles shop, leaving only the girl who was coughing and whose face was full of disgust. For a long time, the girl's face turned pale, and she only felt a faint pain in her abdomen. Soon, she spat out a mouthful of blood, with a fierce and twisted expression on her side, lying on the table. Shusha sauce. At the moment when the girl had just fallen, Suzuki ran out of the toilet and wrapped his almost trembling hand around the girl he called Takashita. "How could that be? I just went to the restroom." Suzuki-do's tears wet his hands and the girl's clothes, and he vigorously shook the girl, but to no avail. In the ramen noodles shop, everyone glanced at the sound source at the moment when the girl fell down, but no one noticed that when Suzuki left the bathroom, a figure almost walked out with him. And this is what Li Ming, who sat in the corner and observed the incident before him, finally saw. Looking at Jusha, who had already fainted, Suzuki's heart ached incessantly, but he couldn't think of any way. He could only hold on to the bamboo in his arms, desperately breathing in the air like a drowning person, trying every means possible to wake it up. However, these actions are ultimately in vain. Takashita is already dead, his girlfriend is already dead. Although the cause of death is unknown, the fact that Takashita is no longer breathing is deeply imprinted in Suzuki's mind. He cried so bitterly that the whole ramen noodles shop echoed with his depressed and sad cry. "Tisk, it's really disgusting. This kind of silly woman is dead when she dies. What's there to cling to?" Looking back at the situation in the ramen noodles shop, the man who left the bathroom with Suzuki sniffed and whispered, and then left with great strides. The man's voice was not too loud, but for Li Ming, whose attention was completely focused on him, he had already heard this sentence word for word. Li Ming frowned, although very worried about the situation of the man and woman in front of him. The current situation was obviously more urgent. At least for him. In various senses, egoism is Li Ming's personal belief. Although such people are often referred to as cold-blooded, in Li Ming's current situation, this kind of spiritualism is obviously more suitable for him. Li Ming took a Japanese yen note on the table, picked up the electronic watch and the long-handle black umbrella, followed the man closely behind, and left the ramen noodles shop. Outside, the sun is still shining brightly, warm and dazzling, shining on every corner of the earth without any holes. However, the ramen noodles shop behind us seems to be in a haze against the background of the environment. Li Ming took a deep breath and restrained his emotions. He had a premonition that the man had hidden one of the secrets he had been exploring. As long as we find that man, everything will probably become clear, right? There is another chapter, sorry for the slow coding. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. 008 Nightmares. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. 009 Tailed Snake. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9009. Tailed Snake. So, welcome to my white nightmare, dear Mr. Li Ming. With the sound echoing, a pair of invisible hands gently covered Li Ming's eyes. The black tide surged up, as if losing all senses. Finally, only the sound of liquid falling to the ground echoed in his ears. Li Ming pursed his lips and stood in place without moving, but the gentle breeze blowing by his side made him feel that the person around him had disappeared at some point. Is it a white nightmare? From the series of behaviors just now, it can be fully seen that Watanabe is trying to guide himself into this place and then drag himself into the so-called nightmare. Although she doesn't often go to the hospital to check on the patient's condition, Li Ming has also heard from informant Jiang Wencan that the patient's symptoms can be triggered by Meng together with others. So, perhaps this is the current situation. What made Li Ming somewhat puzzled was why Watanabe was not in this dream, even though the two of them had triggered Meng. Indeed, relying solely on one's own reasoning and speculation, it is still difficult to understand the principle that this is not something that should be in reality. Li Ming thought so he gave up his contemplation. The most important thing now is to find a way to escape from here. Slightly closing her eyes and opening them again, Li Ming had already adapted to the darkness and cast her gaze around, its thick fog again. The narrow space of the elevator was filled with intense black mist, which caused Li Ming to temporarily lose sight in this area due to the abnormal color of the mist. Li Ming is a bit restless. Visual deprivation, auditory interference with noisy liquid dripping, and tactile sensation can only touch cold walls. It's strange to say that in such an environment, Li Ming, who hates dazzling things, is so eager for light that he even thinks it would be great if there were sunshine. Wait, the elevator lobby should have emergency lighting like the corridors in hospitals. With this thought in mind, Li Ming used his memory to touch the wall in front of him, trying to find the switch. Dida. The liquid is still falling, and Li Ming has a premonition that if he continues to let these unknown liquids drip onto the floor, something bad will definitely happen. Encountered it. The buttons in the elevator room have grooves or protrusions, so Li Ming quickly touched the button he wanted to touch. Pop. The red light instantly lit up, and the rolling black mist dissipated with the appearance of this light. With the help of the still slightly dim lighting, Li Ming finally saw the full view of the elevator room. There was a puddle of liquid in the position where he had just stood by Watanabe, all of which showed a strange red color. Under the illumination of the light, the two almost blend together, making people feel even more boundless fear. Li Ming furrowed his brows and dipped his fingertips in some liquid, sniffing it in front of his nose. The strong smell of blood instantly penetrated his nose. Cough. Li Ming instinctively coughed due to the impact of such a smell on her nose. Although he had already made an almost accurate guess when he saw the liquid, with a sense of luck, he chose to try it himself. Dida. The sticky liquid almost rubbed against his face and dripped down again. Li Ming instinctively took a step back, then looked up and followed the source, and her pupils suddenly contracted. A corpse was fixed on the top of the elevator with a specially shaped dagger. By virtue of gravity, the whole corpse took on a strange and twisted shape. It looked like its back was glued to the ceiling, and its limbs fell together in the same direction. The left arm was twisted into a fried dough twists. His neck was twisted, but his head did not fall off as a result. Upon closer inspection, one can see a steel bar inserted in the center of his eyebrows. Li Ming pursed her lips and continued to squint her eyes, wanting to see the full picture of the body in front of her, which was specifically used to fix concrete walls. The bright red blood slid along the skin of the corpse and fell to the ground, which was the sound accompanied by the liquid dripping onto the ground just now. Turning his gaze to the face of the corpse, Li Ming was startled and quickly took a step back. Because he knew the body, which was Naosu Watanabe, who had just taken the elevator with him and wanted to assassinate him. After comparing the position where Watanabe just stood with the fixed position of the body, we can indeed find some completely matching clues. Is this really Watanabe's body? While Li Ming was lost in thought, strange patterns and numbers suddenly appeared on the display screen used to play advertisements on the elevator's button panel. Accompanied by this is the noisy mechanical sound, ding. Welcome to take the White Nightmare elevator. Please select the floor you are going to on this screen within the specified time. Ding. Please note that if you do not select the floor you are going to within the specified time, you will face death. Ding. Please note that if you have not selected the floors you are about to go to within the specified time, there may be asterisk noise. The sound coming from under the screen made Li Ming feel a wave of discomfort. After the sound, I turned my gaze back to the screen, where the countdown number, 300, and a white snake pattern appeared. There were no other options to choose from. The snake with a slightly white light on the display screen, mixed with the red color in the elevator room, is exceptionally prominent. Does the number 300 mean 300 seconds? Li Ming placed his hand on his chin in a state of contemplation. The increasingly strong smell of blood and a feeling of being at a loss made him a little restless. After reaching out and touching the cold screen with a finger, there was no response except for the warm and damp fingerprint marks that gradually disappeared. The air froze again, and Li Ming became increasingly anxious. The feeling of wanting to escape this place by all means but being powerless and having to stare was really unbearable. What do I need to do? What exactly do I need to do to break this deadlock? The tailed snake, the ancestor of self-devouring creatures, has a perfect structure with its head and tail connected. The tail snake represents self-reference and infinite cycle, just like the undead bird, reborn in self-destruction, and is generally used to represent the meaning of infinite and infinite. Time, there are still 150 seconds left. Li Ming's brain was running rapidly, constantly searching for the right answer. The tailed snake represents infinity, so that is to say, will I be trapped here forever? Is that the meaning? An unnamed anger surged into his heart, and Li Ming stood still. His eyebrows were filled with anger, and he couldn't continue to think. He faced the electronic screen directly, and his thoughts had already become his shadow. No, it can't be like this. Accompanied by an impending outburst of emotions, there was a muffled sound. Bang! Calvin, 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 today we'll start with a chapter and keep getting stuck until now. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. 010 Illusions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors.